Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 22. So we but meet, not part, again. Mrs. Carpew and her daughter toiled all the morning in the expectation of their aristocratic visitor. They could have very little help from Sarah, the maid-of-all-work, who had her hands full with everyday work of the family, scrubbing floors, peeling potatoes, making beds, carrying water, cooking the poor little bit of meat that had to be eked out with so much plain pudding and home-grown vegetables. All Sarah could do in the cleaning of the drawing-room was to come with her worn-out carpet-broom and sweep, raising such a mighty dust in the process that it might have seemed almost wiser not to sweep. When Sarah had swept, Mrs. Carpew and her daughter began to tidy, and tidying the vicarage drawing-room was a work that ought to have ranked almost as high as the labours of Hercules. The mother went about the business in a desultory way, murmuring complaints against fate and her own children as she worked. Were there ever such untidy boys? Cards here, dominoes there, pipes everywhere, and such pipes! It made her sick to touch them. What would her mother, whose drawing-room, under the difficulties of barrack life, was always refined and artistic, think if she could see such a room as this? But then my mother only had me, said Mrs. Carpew. Well, mother, I suppose you'd hardly like to see all of us reduced to one girl, said Gertrude, who was working briskly and steadily, cleaning corners, polishing the shabby old Chippendale chairs that the vicar had bought cheap at a farmhouse auction, going for a mere song because of their old-fashioned shape, before anybody in that remote world knew that such chairs were a thing of beauty, shaking the dust out of the window curtains, bringing the black lead brush, and giving an extra polish to the old iron grate. Gertrude stopped at nothing that could improve the aspect of that shabby old room. But it really don't seem much good doing anything else. One could whitewash the ceiling and repaper the walls, she said, looking round despondingly after nearly 2 hours' hard work. That odious paper was a triumph of ugliness to begin with, and dirt hasn't improved it. Mother and daughter dined sketchily at 1 o'clock, with the depressed father and the hungry lads and lasses who reduced the shoulder of mutton to so bare a bone that it promised badly for a grill for the vicar's breakfast, especially if Sarah is to dine off it, remarked discontentedly. Mrs. Carpew reassured him. Sarah was dining on a dumpling. Any scraps of meat served to make Sarah a dumpling. The younger girls were excited at the idea of Lady Penrith's visit. "Shall we see her?" asked Lilian, who came next to Gertrude, but was not considered out. "Certainly not," replied Gertie. "Look at your frock. Positively disgraceful." "Shall we see her, Ma?" repeated Lilian, scorning the sisterly reply. "Of course not. You and Ethel have treated those nice alpacas shamefully." "They were never nice," grumbled Ethel. "They are the most hideous frocks you could have chosen." "What is all this about Lady Penrith?" asked the vicar, looking up from his plate to join in the family talk, which he usually ignored. "Is she coming here?" "Yes, at 3 o'clock this afternoon." "What for?" "Why, to pay us a visit, of course. I daresay she has heard that Gertrude is growing up, and sympathises with our want of society." Gertrude has society enough when she is marching about the place with Stephen Maltby, grumbled the vicar. Society, forsooth. I'd swap the best society in Cumberland for a £5 note. The sons laughed. The daughters sat in dumb disgust. They had inherited all their mother's longings and regrets, and had heard thrilling stories of the gaiety of garrison towns, regimental dances, archery meetings, a brilliant world in which their mother's girlhood had been spent, a dazzling sphere inaccessible for them. Gertrude would have sacrificed 5 years of her life for one garrison ball, if Mephistopheles had offered the opportunity. "I can't understand Lady Penrith coming to this house," said the vicar with a troubled look. "She cannot want nothing here but to pry and to spy." "I suppose you can't conceive of the possibility of her wanting to see Ma and me," retorted his eldest daughter haughtily. "No, I can't," answered the vicar with paternal candour. Dinner concluded under a cloud, but not much heavier a cloud than usually enveloped the family meal, for there was seldom a dinner that went from start to finish without trouble of some kind, trouble about underdone meat or overdone meat, watery vegetables, cold gravy, trouble about insolent rejoinders from the boys, possibly not meant to be insolent. Mrs. Carpew insisted that in meaning they were as doves, which provoked the father's wrath. Trouble, boiled and bubbled every day in the cauldron of life at St. Jude's Vicarage. Today, Gertrude sacrificed her share in the sloppy rice pudding in order to make her toilette in good time for the expected visit. And at 2:45, Mrs. Carpew and daughter were seated in the drawing-room, employed in some genteelly useless needlework, and trying to look as though they sat there every afternoon. The odour of dogs and tobacco had been subjugated by widely opened windows, and the room was really tidy. Sarah had been instructed as to the bringing of the afternoon tea, and urged to serve it with more style than she had ever done for the farmers' wives. "Suppose she doesn't come after all our trouble," speculated Gertie, watching the road from the low bow window. "I couldn't suppose her guilty of anything so unladylike." "Oh, well, I don't know. It would be just like our luck if she didn't turn up, after all. Oh, there she comes. I can see those heavenly ponies. Dear little things. I wonder if Sarah has come downstairs." Gertrude ran to the kitchen to assure herself. Yes, Sarah was there, dressed as she was rarely dressed at that hour, in her Sunday stuff gown, clean apron and cap, and the tea-tray was ready on the kitchen table, and there were tea-cakes baking. "She's coming! Look sharp, Sarah," said Gertie, and then flew back to the drawing-room and took up her crewel work once more. "Lady Penrith," announced the maid-of-all-work. How handsome, how graceful in form and movement, how simply dressed. Gertie wondered at the plain cloth gown, whose only merit was the perfection with which the severely cut bodice fitted the finely proportioned figure. Only a rough brown cloth. This mistress of many thousands a year was more plainly attired than a farmer's wife in her Sunday gown. But Gertie felt instinctively that the cloth gown and neat little felt hat were just the right things for a country drive on a dull autumn day, and she had the felicity later of seeing and even handling the long sealskin coat which her ladyship had left in the hall. "This is quite too kind of you, dear Lady Penrith," exclaimed Mrs. Carpew, with a reminiscence of garrison manners. "It is such a pleasure to my daughter and me to become acquainted with you personally, after hearing your praises so perpetually. You are very good, and I am very glad to know you and Miss Carpew," Sibyl replied graciously, and then, with an earnest look and grave voice, she continued, "I must not sail under false colours. I had a very serious purpose in coming here today." "A bazaar," thought the vicar's wife, "and she wants us to work for it. Just like these fine ladies. They never take anyone up without a motive." Mrs. Carpew was quite willing to be taken up if the price to be paid were not too high. "I want to enlist your sympathy for myself and for one who is very dear to me, and who is, I have reason to believe, a dweller under this roof." Mrs. Carpew started, flushed, and then slowly paled. "I don't understand." "You don't understand the link between me and the unfortunate gentleman who lives under your charge," said Sibyl, looking intently into the weak, commonplace countenance. "Pray be frank with me. How long has he been with you?" Mrs. Carpew hesitated, stammered in an inaudible word or two, in evident distress. "I really don't know," she faltered after that embarrassed pause. "I can't tell you anything about him. He's in my husband's care. I never interfere. The vicar took him in, from benevolent motives, I believe, to oblige an old friend. Of course we are paid something for his maintenance. We are too poor to dispense with payment, but not nearly so much as would have to be paid anywhere else." "To oblige an old friend," repeated Sibyl. "Yes, that is just as I thought. But think now, Mrs. Carpew, you must remember how long he has been here." "Indeed, Lady Penrith, I do not. 1 year is so like another in this dull place. But surely you can fix the date of an important event like that, a stranger coming under your roof. And then you have a living calendar, and your children, their ages would tell you." "I remember, Ma," interjected Gertrude, who had listened with keenest curiosity, who rushed into the conversation, unconscious of her mother's frowns. "It was the year that Bobby was born. You hadn't left your room. He was a tiny, tiny baby, and one day old Nurse Bond told me there had been a fine to-do, and 2 gentlemen had arrived early in the morning. They must have come by sea, she thought, for one of them was wet through, and his coat dripped sea-water. He wasn't right in his mind, and he was to stay." "It was a stormy morning?" suggested Sibyl. "Yes, it was a stormy morning. Nurse Bond had to light a fire and get dry clothes for the gentleman who stayed. She told me all about it when she came to the nursery at breakfast time," added Gertrude eagerly, and then, for the first time, became aware of her mother's warning scowl. What had she done? Mischief, perhaps. She had been expressly forbidden to talk of the mysterious boarder. Her mother's white face and distracted look smote her with sudden terror. Mrs. Carpew, I appeal to you as woman to woman, said Sybil, with clasped hands and a voice that thrilled both listeners with such depth of earnestness in its tone. Let me see this person. He may not be the person I think, but if he is, I would sacrifice half my fortune to look upon his face again, and to give him help and comfort in his affliction. You shall be no losers, you and your husband, for doing me that kindness. You shall indeed be greatly the gainers. You know that I am rich, and you may suppose I would not count the cost where my affection was concerned. I firmly believe that the person in your care is a kinsman of mine, one whom I loved years ago, before Lord Penrith asked me to be his wife. I am quite frank with you. I keep nothing back from you or from your daughter, for I can see that she sympathizes with me. Indeed I do, interjected Gertrude. And I don't think you can refuse me your sympathy. Let me see him, if only for 5 minutes, and then, among us all, the vicar, and you, and I, we may arrange some plan for making his life happier. Only let me see him. Let me be sure he is the man I am looking for. What could possibly make you suppose that he is your relation, Lady Penrith? Mrs. Carpew asked, her countenance expressing a conflict of ideas in a brain that afforded very little room for struggle. A letter in his own hand. A letter? How could he have sent a letter? He has not written to anybody for years. He has no messenger. He has written to me. He has found a messenger, answered Sybil. Out of the depths, she repeated to herself. Woman, for God's sake, show that you have a woman's heart, she cried passionately, losing all patience with the flabby creature before her. Yes, Ma, do. If you have any more feeling in you than a bran pincushion, put in Gertie indignantly. It is such a small thing that I am asking, only to see him for a few minutes. The tears were streaming down Sybil's pale cheeks. Gertrude, with difficulty, refrained from hitting her mother. It is not a small thing. It is a very big thing. No one is allowed to see him, not even my own children. I appeal to Gertrude. Don't appeal to me. I hate you, cried her rebellious daughter. If I wished ever so, and indeed, dear Lady Penrith, I do sympathize with you, I couldn't let you see him. That part of the house, he has quite the best rooms in the vicarage, is locked off, and the vicar keeps the key. It would be impossible, if I ever wished ever so, and I do wish. For gracious sakes, don't go on rambling like that, cried Gertie. You can ask Pa, I suppose. If he does keep the door locked, he can give you the key. He's not a Bluebeard. Yes, I can ask him, faltered Mrs. Carpew, as if catching at an escape from present perplexity. I will ask him, Lady Penrith. You may be sure I will do all in my power to accomplish what you wish. But indeed I believe you are labouring under a delusion. In the first place, our poor friend could not possibly have communicated with you. I tell you he has communicated with me. Mrs. Carpew, for pity's sake, don't beat about the bush. You say you will ask your husband. Go and ask him, or bring him here and let me plead my own cause. I feel assured he will hear reason. He is out, answered Mrs. Carpew. Are you sure of that? Quite sure. I saw him go out half an hour ago. The latter part of the speech was a falsehood. Mrs. Carpew had seen her husband creeping past the bow window with furtive glances at the occupants only 5 minutes before, and she knew that the vicar had been, in her own domestic language, on the listen. The vicar might be on the listen still, perhaps outside the drawing-room door. In any case, it would not do for his wife to compromise him. There must be time for consideration. She hoped that she would see his way to serving Lady Penrith, rather than that other person who rewarded them so scantily for watchful care and service. She hoped, but she felt that extreme caution was necessary upon her part. "How long will he be out?" asked Sibyl impatiently. "I can wait." "He is so very uncertain," answered Mrs. Carpew with a warning look at her daughter. "He may be away for hours. This is such an immense parish, so poor and so few people, but stretching over such a lot of ground. He may have gone to one of the furthest farmhouses, and he is a slow walker." At this point the tea-tray bumped against the door, which was opened rather awkwardly by the bearer of the tray. Sarah sailed in and began to spread out a very smart tea-cloth, an unsold item of a sale of work for parochial purposes, which had lapsed as a perquisite to the vicar's wife. "I will wait," said Lady Penrith. "Perhaps you would kindly put up my ponies for an hour or so?" "I am so sorry," apologised Mrs. Carpew. "We only have a 2-stall stable, and as we keep no conveyance, the boys have filled both stalls with their rabbit hutches." "And the stable smells too dreadful," ejaculated Gertie. "Never mind. I see the groom has put their rugs on," said Lady Penrith, who had been looking out the window, "and they are very hardy. I should like to wait for the vicar's return, Mrs. Carpew, if I am not in your way." "In my way, dear Lady Penrith? How can you suggest such a thing?" exclaimed the vicar's wife, her garrison manner struggling with mental agonies. Gertrude, who had heard that it was the right thing for the daughter of the house to pour out the tea, had seated herself at the tray, a position she was wont to seize on state occasions, in defiance of her mother. "I'll slip out and inquire if the vicar has left word where he has gone," said Mrs. Carpew, making for the door. "Perhaps he may not have gone to any of his distant parishioners after all." She had disappeared from the drawing-room before anyone could reply. She hurried along the passage, looked into the vicar's den. It was empty. She crossed a lobby, went up 3 steps, and knocked at the door which divided the new wing from the original building. It was an additional door which had been put there within the last 10 years, a heavy door, covered with green baize, shutting with a steel spring. She knocked twice before the door was opened by the vicar himself. "Well, has she gone?" "No, she is waiting for you. Oh, there's been such a scene. I feel so sorry for her." And then, standing just within the green baize door, Mrs. Carpew related her conversation with Lady Penrith. "Cream and sugar?" inquired Gertrude, smiling across the table at her guest as she poured out the tea. Sybil was too agitated to answer the trivial question. "Now we are alone, let me thank you for your sympathy," she said. "I know you are a warm, kind-hearted girl, and if you will help me, as I feel sure you can, you will find that I am not ungrateful. You shall have something better than rabbits in your stable." Oh, please don't think me mercenary. Don't think I am influenced by the idea of your money or your rank. Indeed, I am not so paltry-minded as that, Lady Penrith. I should be just as sorry for you if you were just as poor as Ma and Pa. But I'm afraid there's nothing I can do to help you, nor Ma either. Ma is the most helpless person I know. She's just under Pa's thumb. If he were to tell her to shut us all up in the attic and feed us on bread and water, she would do it. She'd be very sorry for us, and she'd go about the house crying all day, but she'd give way to Pa. She hasn't any backbone. That's what Stephen says of her. No backbone. "Stephen is your sweetheart, perhaps?" speculated Sybil. "He wants to be, but he's not allowed. His people are only small tenant farmers like the Martins in Miss Austen's Emma, and Pa and Ma say I should lose caste. Of course I don't want to lose caste, but the Maltbys are ever so much better off than we are, and live in a sweet old house and keep a gardener and a boy to look after the stable, and a Whitechapel cart, and have everything about them as neat as a new pin. And here everything is wretched, and Pa is trying enough to break the spirit of the whole family." Sad and agitated as she was, Lady Penrith could not refrain from a faint smile at the idea of Mrs. Carpew's daughter losing caste by marrying a farmer. "I don't want to suggest disobedience, Miss Carpew, but if this Mr. Maltby is a good man, I think your father should reconsider his decision." "He is good as gold. But please don't think I care much about him." "Well, you will give me your confidence another day, perhaps, when I am happier. And now tell me, have you never seen the gentleman who lives in those shut-off rooms?" "Never." "That's very strange. Surely he goes out into the air sometimes, if not every day." "I believe he sometimes walks in the garden at the east end of the house, a walled garden with a row of fir trees inside the wall. We can't see into it from any of our windows. No, as strange as it may seem, I have never seen him. He might be the man in the iron mask for anything I know about him." Mrs. Carpew reappeared at this moment, and informed Lady Penrith with polite regrets that the vicar had gone out an hour ago, and that he had left word that he might not be home until late in the evening. He had gone to one of the furthest cottages in his parish. "Then you think there would be no use in my waiting for him," said Sybil. "No use, delightful as it is to Gertrude and me to see you here. But I hope you'll at least stop for a second cup of tea." "Thank you. No, I have a long drive home. I'm very glad to have made your acquaintance and your daughter's, but I must see the vicar without an hour's avoidable delay. Will you ask him to be kind enough to stop at home tomorrow morning? I will drive here directly after breakfast. I am sure he'll be charmed to see you, and willing to grant my request, I hope. I shall think it very strange if he refuses," said Lady Penrith, with a touch of sternness. "I think you rather overdid it, Ma," said Gertie, as the visitor had been escorted to her carriage and had driven away. "What do you mean, miss, by overdoing?" "About Pa in the furthest cottage. It's very odd if Lady Penrith didn't see him walk past the window while she was talking." End of chapter 22.